This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and I'm in the office of Lucas St. Clair. We're going to find out just how much I understand about the proposed national park in the Maine woods. What could possibly go wrong?
No, that's a total misunderstanding, and it's used from time to time as an argument against a national park, but it's a complete misunderstanding.
We're jumping right into it here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Lucas St. Clair is my guest. He's president of the board of Elliotsville Plantation, Inc., and he's the go-to guy when you want to talk about putting a national park in the Maine woods along the east branch of the Penobscot River. Let's see what he's got to say. Today's show is brought to you by Old Town Trading Post, Dysarts, Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Van Raymond Outfitters, O'Neill's Power Equipment, and EBS. Let's talk about the proposed park and start with a recap of the history. How did we get here from there?
Sure. It's a bit of a long story,
yes.
But over the years there's been a handful of proposals for national parks in the Northwoods of Maine, and I think that for the most part it was a lot of people sort of looking into Maine and putting their ideas forward without really diving into what's going on the ground, what these communities are what's really important to these communities and what what makes them tick, and how to find a national park that would work within the parameters that already exist up there. So what we found in 2011, I started working for this foundation, the foundation that my family started, and spent a lot of time just having one-on-one conversations with people in the region, and realized that hunting, snowmobiling, are really a big part of the outdoor recreation. It's a huge component of the outdoor recreation.
Yeah, it's in our blood. It's a tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, because of the arguments around snowmobiling and Yellowstone and on and
right.
on and on, people just didn't understand that you could allow for snowmobiling in national parks, and you can hunt in national parks. In fact, you can hunt in about 80 national parks.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's snowmobiles in Acadia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. They're limited to where you can go, but you can go.
You can go, exactly, right. So as the proposal is continuing to develop, we haven't not sent a proposal to the Park Service, the Department of Interior at this point. Mm-hmm. But the way it's shaping up is looking at creating two parks. One is a National Scenic Park, which would be like Acadia, with the same rules and regulations, similar rules and regulations, and one would be a national recreation area. Mm-hmm. The recreation area would allow us to have a management plan that would be a little bit different. It would allow for some sustainable forestry. It would allow for snowmobile use. It would allow for hunting, and we would and actually managing the habitat for the critters, which is something that it was really important from the community as we got to know people. So.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, as I said before, it's a tradition. Everyone has their own picture of what a national park is. Is the vision just to creating a scenic park and then decide opportunities for hunting, fishing, traditional activities?
The vision is to create a very unique park unit in Maine, and I think that it's oftentimes misunderstood what national parks really are. And to give you a brief understanding, the national parks are Lowell, Massachusetts. They're Gettysburg, which is a historic battlefield. Mm-hmm. They're Yellowstone and Acadia and Yosemite and the Grand Canyon, but they're also Teddy Roosevelt's home and places that are really important to American history and the cultural heritage, the significant cultural heritage of our nation. And so, when we think about a national park in northern Maine, it would be a very unique place. It wouldn't be like Yellowstone. Yeah. It also wouldn't be like Lowell, Massachusetts, but it would have components that would highlight the region, not just for its natural beauty and resources, but for its cultural heritage and really flesh out why this place is significant, not just from a beautiful standpoint.
It's really hard, I think, for people to grasp the differences between national parks nationwide. And you're right. There's one national park that's 0.2 of an acre.
Right.
I think the smallest full-size national park is only 6,000 acres, and that's in Hot Springs, Arkansas. There are some pretty small national parks that still generate a whole lot of activity for the local economy. How big is the scenic portion of this park in terms of acres as you vision it right now?
About 75,000 acres. Mm-hmm. We're hoping the two units would have in the legislation what's called an acquisition boundary that would surround the park, and it would create the maximum size that it could be. And that maximum size would be 150,000 acres divided equally between the scenic park and the recreation area. We don't own all that land at this point, and private land exists within most national parks. It's part of it.
Oh, absolutely.
But
it is in Acadia.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're looking at this point.
75,000 acres. To put that in perspective, people can't necessarily visualize what 75,000 acres looks like. But if you know Baxter State Park, it's only a third maybe of the size of that, which is I think 210,000 acres.
Yeah, exactly. Baxter's 210,000. So the entire park and recreation area combined would still be about 60,000 acres smaller.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem and part of the challenge that we're faced with is that there was a proposal back in the early 90s for a national park that was $3.2 million, right?
Yeah. And they still restore Boston bumper stickers all over the north.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're talking about a park that was 1/40th the size of that, and we just don't see Restore's vision as being realistic at all. But the opponents continue to lump our project in with Restore's, and it happens on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, some of this is just an education of understanding. I think people, myself included, have to get a grip on how big the project is really proposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
My guest is Lucas St. Clair, president of Elliottsville Plantation, Inc., and the chief proponent of a new national park in Maine. Whenever you talk about the Maine woods, someone's likely to say, you can't get there from here. But there are towns that would be on the edge of such a park, and life will change in those towns. Gateway Community's up next, as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. We're talking with Lucas St. Clair, president of Elliottsville Plantation, Inc., about a proposed national park along the east branch of the Penobscot River. And we got a lot to talk about. Whenever you have a project of any kind like that, a national park, there are gateways. There are communities that are going to be affected because you've got to get there from here. What I know where you are. I've been to the property before. I've been up to Lunxus and hung out with your caretakers, so I'm familiar with how to get there. But you're not going in from Millinocket. You're going in from Sherman, Ashland. Where's the access when we talk about the communities that most can be affected? Well,
it depends on where you're coming from. There is access from the south between the Roberts Road that goes up between East Millinocket and Millinocket.
I was there 2 weeks ago.
Right, so that's an access point. So I think Millinocket would be absolutely a gateway community. But also I think Patton would be a gateway community. I think Sherman and Stacyville have the opportunities of being a gateway community. Obviously Medway, right off the highway and part right on the scenic byway, the Katahdin Woods and Water Scenic Byway, and also the small hamlet of Mattagamon, which is the entrance from the very north, and also the north entrance into Baxter State Park. So there are several, and very similar to Acadia National Park, there would be several places to access different areas to the park, and all the towns around it, I think, would benefit, including Bangor, really, which I think would be the real gateway town in a lot of ways.
It really would.
Yeah, many people would access both Acadia and the Northwoods through Bangor. They would fly into the airport there. They would rent their cars there. They may spend a night on the beginning and end of their trip as they plan on the visits to the Katahdin region and to Acadia. And because with two parks, there would be much more of an incentive to come here, because there would be two parks to
visit. In
visit.
fact, David Vail, a professor at Bowdoin College you're probably familiar with, wrote a study, I think, a decade ago, saying that if you look at the impacts of parks, if you have two parks in an area, the exponential value of having two parks as a destination way overshadows just one.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I look at Colorado; they got 4 national parks.
Yeah, and St. George, Utah, is a perfect example where you can fly into St. George and you visit Zion, Canyonlands, Arches, Bryce, all of those parks, and St. George acts as the hub for travel.
I looked at the stats years ago, and I don't know if it's still true, but among the most visited national parks, it tended to be Acadia. It tended to be Great Smoky Mountains because, the population's in the east. If it's within driving distance of a lot of people, you can direct a lot of of the economy that way, a lot of tourism dollars. But of course, a lot of people up north don't want tourism.
Yeah, I think that there's some concern about what tourism really is, and what if you had worked in a paper mill and made a living that was enough to support a family and a good recreation lifestyle. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine working as a chambermaid or working as a waitress in a restaurant and working in sort of the traditional tourism jobs that most people relate to tourism. Right. But the pushback is tourism is not just that. Tourism are it's bed and breakfast owners, it's catering, and it's event coordinators, and mm-hmm. it's captains of boats, and it's guides and lodges and outfitters, and it's owners of small businesses. And there are a tremendous amount of jobs that come along in the service industry that surround national parks that aren't necessarily related to the tourism industry. Yeah. In the service industry, people tend to, in this day and age where technology has really come so far, you can work remotely. And as long as there's an airport within an hour's drive or so, you can work as a financial planner or an engineer or a graphic designer or a web designer, where all you need is an internet connection and access to an airport maybe once or twice a month to go have some FaceTime with your clients.
Yep. What you really need is a lot of diversified economy around you in order to pull that off.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you also need protected natural resources, where there's great outdoor recreational infrastructure, and a national park does that, the best.
I think you need to stress that again. The tourism industry in Maine, for the most part, is all mom and pop, private ownership, small business. That's what Maine really is, and we need to grow some of that. Because to be honest, we're not going to drag in a whole lot of automobile manufacturing plants into this state, no matter how much wishful thinking may suggest we could. It really is going to be growth of mom and pop businesses and private industry.
Yeah, exactly. It's all it takes is a look at the map of the United States and look at the freeway system. We're at the very end of the line here.
Hey, up in our neck of the woods, you don't want to open that can of worms when it comes to the East-West Highway proposal.
Right. But when you think about moving things to Maine for large-scale manufacturing, we don't have the clear advantage like North Carolina or Kansas, which have they're on the main line. They have the ability to move things in all kinds of directions. That's their geographic advantage. We just based on where we are on the map, we don't have that advantage. But the advantages that we do have, we need to capitalize on, and that's tremendous natural resources, beautiful, beautiful natural resources from our coast to our inlands. We have an incredible renewable resources in our forests that we need to continue to have tremendous invention and continue to innovate and come up with great products for our wood.
Because that is what we can manufacture and add value to.
Absolutely. And we've been doing it for 100 years. That's what we're good at. And so we need to continue to focus on that. And we've also been a destination for tourism for 100 years. In 2016, Acadia will celebrate its 100th anniversary. And so we've been doing those two things for a long, long time, and we can't abandon them to put all of our eggs in one basket. And in some ways, that's what's had the biggest effect on the Katahdin region is that the two giant mills that were Great Northern were the only thing that was driving the economy. And we now are all watching as that has come unraveled. And the town those towns of Millinocket and East Millinocket and Medway are really struggling because of it. Yeah. And so diversification really is the key.
Well, I think that's a lesson Maine either has to learn or maybe already has, is a diversified economy is the only way you're going to sustain yourself for the centuries. If you're just dependent on paper, if you're just dependent on wood, you may have a good paper company job, but your daughter isn't necessarily going to the mill. And if she has an opportunity to go own a small bed and breakfast nearby or work in the tourism industry, at the very least, you may profit from that. Or maybe you're not going to own a tourism business yourself, a bed and breakfast in whatever, but you're going to own a boat shop or an outfitter to get people into the woods better dressed. That's the kind of tourism retail that can exist in an area once you've got enough people going there.
That's right. And I see the products that are being made in Maine that are so cool. Lucid Skis, which are making downhill skis entirely out of Maine wood, and they employ a couple people. They're capitalizing on the outdoor recreation that we have in Maine and the snow that we have in Maine. Look at New England Outdoor Center, and Matt Polstein has got 26 full-time employees that get benefits and making good salary. So, there's a tremendous opportunity. We just have to begin to go through this visualization time to recognize what those jobs are really like, and being able to experience it firsthand is what will begin to convince more and more people that it's really possible.
We'll take a break, and then I'll ask Lucas St. Clair about the two biggest obstacles to change in northern Maine. I'll tell you the first one now. We don't like change. It's Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. It's all sports all the time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket, except for 1 hour a week, when we really get outdoors and dig into the fun and adventure and sometimes controversy out there. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and my guest today is Lucas St. Clair, chief proponent of a new national park. He's an outdoorsman who hunts and snowmobiles. He's been a professional fishing guide, and he does know that change comes hard. There are two things you have to fight in order to do that, obviously. One is the fact that, I look at me, I'm a native Mainer, I'm against all change. I don't want anything new. I want everything to be the way I grew up with. So I'm against all change. And the second thing is the two Maines. There is nothing that happens in northern Maine that isn't treated with suspicion if the impetus comes from southern Maine.
Yeah, and that I think is the biggest, or it's a huge detriment to all of Maine. I think it's a real shame because there's a lot of great ideas and energy and resources in southern Maine that could actually make change, make positive change in northern Maine. And there's unbelievable individuals and communities and landscapes in northern Maine that will affect people, will make people better people if they are able to bear witness to it. And so the fact that southern Mainers aren't going to northern Maine and experiencing what that place is like is also a shame.
It is. It drives me crazy. I mean, there's a lot of people in southern Maine who haven't seen a moose.
Yeah.
Don't even know where to look.
There's a lot of people that haven't been north of Augusta.
Yeah. What studies have you conducted economically to see what the actual revenue benefit could be to northern Maine?
We did two reports, or we didn't, but we hired a firm called Headwaters Economics, and they published two reports. One of which looked at Penobscot and Piscataquis County from 1970 to 2010 to see what's happened on the landscape in that period of time.
Well, mostly people left.
Yeah, there's been growth, but the growth has been slow compared to the national average, and our population is getting older. The service sector has grown compared to a shrinking manufacturing sector. Healthcare is the fastest growing industry in that part of Maine. There are 10 jobs in healthcare for every one job in the timber industry, which is pretty remarkable. And there has been some diversification, but it's certainly slower than the national average. But the main point is that the population is getting significantly older, and that's true for Maine, all of Maine, and we have more deaths than births. We've had that for the last few years, so that's not the ideal model for growing the economy.
Well, certainly. You have a disappearing workforce.
That's right, exactly. So that was the first study. The second study we did, we looked at 16 counties that were very similar to Penobscot County. They had a city that had about 30,000 people in it, which had an airport. It was similar in size, population, and land base. And the only difference were those 16 counties around the country either had a national park or a national park and a national recreation area, or just a recreation area. And we thought, okay, what's happening in those counties? And every county that had a national park that we studied, the growth was far outpacing the national average in both in all of the categories that we measured for population, employment, and personal income. And the only place where there was some variance was where there was just a national recreation area. Some of the counties were better, but some were not. So there was a bit of a variance there.
Well, a national recreation area really doesn't have a brand.
Right.
It's not, I would, I live in Maine. I know where my national park is. I know where a lot of national parks are nationwide. I don't know where any national recreation areas are. They just don't have a brand that I'd recognize.
That's right. And oftentimes, when you go to a national recreation area, it's because you went to the national park that is right next door.
Yeah.
And that's how people get to them. But a couple interesting things in the studies that had around national parks is that the economy was doing quite well in 100% of the cases where there was a national park, far outpacing the national average. The employment was high and growing, and the population was growing, but personal income was growing the most. And so individuals in these regions are getting richer. So the argument that national parks are only good for tourism and tourism are low-paying jobs is just incorrect. The people that were working in and around the national parks in those counties were getting wealthier, and they were getting wealthier than Americans on average. And so those were service jobs. And you have to remember, service jobs include financial planners and lawyers and nurses and engineers. Those are all jobs that qualify as service. So it's a more diverse economy based than many people give it credit for. And it's happening in counties where national parks exist to a level that is significantly better than the national average.
Now, one thing that Mainers can be skeptical about right now is the idea of getting a study done, because I think, as we've seen at the state level, you can actually put out a no-bid contract and buy whatever results you want. So how do we know your study's valid? How do we know that you just didn't go out there and buy the study you wanted?
Well, we had it peer reviewed. That was the most significant way to get around that, or to prove that it's not just numbers that we cooked. And we asked Charlie Colgan, who is the state economist, Bill Vail, Rob Lilleholm at the University of Maine, at the Forest School, and they peer reviewed it and wrote a letter of sort of approval in the report, saying that all the metrics that we used were metrics that they would use, and all the data was accurate, and the findings that we found were very much equal the findings that they would find if they were to use all of those similar metrics. And so for economists from Maine that understand the rules, verified the accuracy of the report. So I think that's enough to
well, it's certainly more than we're getting from state government right now.
Yeah.
But when you talk about a changing economy, some of the things you might be talking about for changes might make people uncomfortable. And I'm thinking when you go into some national parks, leading into it, Great Smoky Mountain National Parks, for instance, there's a lot of miniature golf courses. There's a lot of amusement parks. There's a lot of things that tourism draws in as well. There's a lot of retirement homes, trailer parks, that sort of thing. There are a lot of national parks that don't have that. Have you thought about that, and what kind of change would you expect to see?
Well, certainly I would anticipate change from a visitation. There would just be more traffic. There would be more people coming to the region. But it really is on the responsibility of the municipalities that are around the park. And oftentimes what's happening now is arguing about where it's going to be, how big is this going to be is this restore? Are we trying to ruin the quality of life for these towns by creating a national park? Really, it's up to the towns. If the towns can create zoning, they can allow for development in certain places. They can allow for density. They could allow for sprawl if they chose to. And I'm anxiously anticipating the day when we can get beyond whether or not a national park will happen or not, and we can start focusing on how to grow the economy and how to do it in a responsible way. And it's a harder conversation today than I think it will be in a few years down the road as we begin to make the shift toward more of a tourism-based economy and more of a service-based economy. But certainly that conversation wasn't even happening 10 years ago.
I think it's a funny part of the conversation is we're actually talking about how do you manage a booming fastest-growing economy
Right.
in the North Woods.
Right, and we're beginning to have those conversations. And the Katahdin Area Chamber of Commerce has endorsed this project. The Katahdin Area Rotary has endorsed the project. The business community is becoming more and more aligned behind this, and so now people are saying, all right, where are the gateway towns? Mm-hmm. Where's the entrance the park going to be? How are we going to control for growth? How can we maintain the quality of community that we have and maintain the aesthetics of these towns, but still be able to capitalize on visitation?
We've got to take a break. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. My guest is Lucas St. Clair, president of Elliottsville Plantation, Inc., and the chief spokesman for a new national park in Maine. One of the objections I've always had about a new national park can be summed up in 2 words: toilet paper. We'll take up the subject next on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. We're back with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket, and we're talking about a new national park in the Maine North Woods. Just before the break, I was about to ask Lucas St. Clair the toilet paper question. One of the reasons I've always been a little bit skeptical about a park in the North Woods, or any federal activity at all in the North Woods, is that Acadia National Park doesn't even have open toilets in the winter.
Right.
God, if they can't even supply toilet paper to visitors in the winter, how are we going to do that in the North Woods?
Well, there is right now infrastructure around the national park with lodges and camps and cabins to rent that are year round. And really, the winter season is the busiest season in the Katahdin region right now. Yeah. So they're very much prepared to accommodate wintertime visitors, and visitation into the park would really be fine. In the wintertime, but we're really focusing on keeping the campgrounds and lodging outside the park. Yeah, and right. So really driving the economy in the towns as opposed to having everyone stay within the park boundary. Mm-hmm. So that would be one way we would get control for that.
Well, if we're going to do that, we're going to have to really include snowmobiling as an activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet, I think, unless they're coming around on it, the Maine Snowmobile Association has been an opponent up to this point.
Yeah, but they certainly, the MSA does not speak for the local communities. The real advocates from the snowmobile community are the local clubs, and many of which are in support of the park and have written letters to our congressional delegation saying as much, and we've been close partners with them to establish new trails, maintain the trails that already exist. So despite MSA in Augusta not being in support of a national park, they really are not an accurate gauge, bellwether for where the support lies. And I think that'll change over time as they recognize the benefits that we provide in allowing snowmobiling into, protecting snowmobile trails into perpetuity. Really, we're offering a deal that no other landowners in Maine are offering, with the exception of Acadia National Park.
One of the things I think that got my attention fairly early on was the idea of endowing this park. Because I think the park system, certainly the National Refuge System, is just starving for money because we don't fund it like we once did. It is not maybe as high a priority in the national budget as it used to be. And yet some of the concept was we will fund this with some endowment money. Is that still on the table?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, if we can create a national park, we plan on endowing it. And you're absolutely right. We have chosen to not fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was set up established to pay for our national park system and our national wildlife service.
We don't fully fund anything.
Yeah, I mean, we really have not done a good job. Certainly, it was set up in the Kennedy administration. Right, it's been fully funded once. Yeah. So there's there's $1 billion of backlog in the national parks around the country. So opponents of the National Park Service and now the national parks say, why create another unit? And so, well, we'll endow it so we don't have to take any funding out of the tax rolls to do it. We'll do it ourselves. And it's precedent setting, really. And the 401 units of the Park Service, there isn't a single endowment. So, this is I think a really great step forward.
Well, one of the things that enlightened me that maybe this could work, I think Congaree National Park, which is a very new park in South Carolina, it's only I want to say 26,000 acres. It's relatively small. It's got some of the best river bottom land in America. And I visited it about 5 years ago. And I think it's only about 6 years old. Fairly small park, but I think there's some kind of additional financial support besides federal there. So you go in there, and the visitor center is like the best I've seen in any national park ever anywhere. The boardwalk was in great shape. I cannot wait to go back there and just hand my credit card to anybody who wants to take it and show me a good time. I was really impressed by that park.
Yeah, it's a beautiful park. The boardwalks are incredible.
They are.
They're really incredible. And right now, that the Park Service is really relying on a lot of private funds, private philanthropy, and to the Friends groups, like the Friends of Acadia, that are doing a tremendous job keeping visitor centers open and building new visitor centers, maintaining trails. I mean, it's a tremendous public-private partnership that is making these national parks work at this point.
That gets lost in the conversation a lot. A lot of the parks, a lot of our national recreation is a public-private partnership because the federal government and our taxes aren't going to fund all this stuff. Plus, the people who are benefiting locally really ought to pitch in a little because it is spurring business wherever good national parks are operating.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. From our nation's capital to the Grand Tetons and to Acadia National Park. When we had an earthquake in Washington, D.C., and it cracked the National Monument, half of the funding, half of the $14 or $15 million to fix that monument came from one private individual. And you're right, it is a public-private partnership. And the Park Service really relies on the people of the United States to recognize and help support this incredible idea that we've had and to protect America's crown jewels. You know, they really are the most cherished landscapes in our country. And so I think as individuals and as the federal government, we all have to step up to support the parks.
Yeah. One of the things that scares a lot of people is the idea of handing over control to the federal government of a significant portion of the North Maine woods. In fact, it's one of those things I probably struggle with is how can I handle this over to a federal bureaucracy?
Well, the Park Service does a fantastic job managing the other parks that it has. It is not a significant part of the North Maine woods. It's less than 1% of the North Maine woods. So it's a pretty small area. And never does it just purely become handing over control. Local advisory groups are set up, and the superintendents and all the rangers that manage the park live in the community. It becomes quite an integrated process, and it's not just one day we lock it all up and throw the keys to the feds and turn our backs on it. That's not how it works at all. And if you look at Acadia as a perfect example, where the Friends of Acadia are made up by people that live in Bar Harbor or live on MDI, the amount of partnership between the Maine Coast Heritage Trust and other conservation groups, from the Bar Harbor Chamber of Commerce and the connection that they have with the park and the superintendent, the deal that Lime Timber just did, a timber company to protect 3,200 acres of Acadia National Park on Scoodic Peninsula, and then also get land to be managed for sustainable forestry. I mean, and that's just what's happened in the last few years in a small park on the coast of Maine. You know, so it really is a true collaboration from the community and the municipal government and the local chambers of commerce, all the way through state government and the Park Service, Department of Interior, and the federal government. It's when people say we're just going to turn over the land to the feds, that's really a limited description of what actually happens. And you have to look at the examples of the Park Service and state parks and how they have helped each other over the course of the years. And looking at the redwoods in California, that if it wasn't for the National Park Service being there, the Redwood State Park would be shut down. And so, you know, we really depend a lot on the federal government. We can't just sort of turn a blind eye to the benefits that the federal government offers us.
Well, as my own thinking evolves on this, I just got back from Colorado in April. 70% of Colorado is publicly owned, and almost, I think it's a higher percentage of that of the woodland in Colorado is federal. And if you go out west, it's Bureau of Lands and Mines. really owns an awful lot of property out there.
That's right.
So we may be scared to have 1% of the North Maine woods taken over by the feds, but in reality, this is not unknown in other states.
Right. I have a great slide that shows all the federal land in Maine, and we have 8 wildlife refuges, the Appalachian Trail, Acadia. I mean, we're very limited. Less than 5% of our total acreage is public, and what that does is make for a pretty uneasy future and an unclear future, as we've seen what's happened in the North Maine woods. Ownership going from 10 or 12 individuals to 100, and that's happened in my short lifetime. So. What's to keep these companies and individuals from doing whatever they want? And they really can.
Yeah,
and,
they can. I mean, we may have a tradition of public access to private land, but everything is changing even though I don't want it to.
That's right. That's right.
This morning's edition of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is all about the proposed national park in the Maine woods. My guest is Lucas St. Clair, who is chief advocate of the idea. We'll likely deal with the subject again in the future, so if you have some questions you think I should have asked or facts that should be challenged, get on our website at 929theticket.com and email them to me. Up next, I'll grill Lucas about some of the objections I've heard on Sports Radio 929 The Ticket. We're back. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is on Sports Radio 929 The Ticket. Lucas St. Clair is my guest. He's defending the proposal for a national park in the Maine woods, and lots of folks have lots of objections. There's a coalition that I went on their website just to see as to why they might not like a park. And some of the arguments were loss of timber. I've been on the property there that's proposed for the national park, and it's already been logged kind of hard. I don't think you were going to get a lot of timber out of there anytime soon.
Right.
How do you figure in the wood basket with this national park proposal?
Well, the land has already been taken out of the wood basket for the most part, and it has been now out of the wood basket for, in most cases, 10 years. And so the market's already adjusted itself and adjusted for that decrease. And so it's not in the wood basket.
Yeah.
It's also, like I said, 1%, less than 1% of the wood basket. And so it's not enough really to make any difference at all. And especially with the mills in Millinocket and East Millinocket closed, there's no the local outlet for wood is gone. And we do, in fact, harvest timber, and we ship it and truck it quite a ways. So I think that it's not a realistic argument at all, and we would have to wait quite a while for many parts of our timberlands to become mature enough to harvest.
The other thing that really worried me about interaction with the timber industry is the road access. All those logging trucks, and the Roberts Road is a perfect example because that's a fairly substantial highway for trucks coming out of the woods. Getting tourism in the way of these trucks is going to be an issue we'll have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't encourage people to drive up the Roberts Road unless they're very comfortable driving on logging roads and understanding the ways of the North Woods and how to yield to trucks and how to drive over the crests of hills and around turns.
Yes.
You have to be experienced.
Don't park in the road on a curve.
That's right. And we educate the people that come visit on those the rules of the road. And then we also encourage people to come in from the Swift Brook Road and the Sherman Lumber Company Road, which have much less pulp truck access, and that comes directly from the relationships that I have with the local landowners that are harvesting timber. I ask them, all right, where are you going to be harvesting timber? I'll make sure that our visitors are coming a different way, because regardless of whose fault it is, a pulp truck runs over a minivan from Connecticut. We all know who wins and loses. That the optics of that aren't good, and we don't want that to happen at all. So making sure, there's a lot of talk in the North Woods about having mixed use, and I don't necessarily think that that's the best idea. When I think separate use, let's harvest trees over here, and let's recreate over here. Let's snowmobile on these trails. You snowmobile on those trails. You cross country ski on those trails, because I do both. And as a cross country skier, it diminishes my experience when a snowmobile goes by. And when I'm on a snowmobile and I go around a turn and there's a bunch of people on cross country skis, it diminishes my experience as a snowmobiler. And the same is true for many different types of uses. And so we really need to find balance and create opportunities for as many different user groups as possible. And that's also true for the timber industry and the way we move trucks, move wood around.
I think it is good thinking to keep them from bumping into each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the things I like about the location of the park as it's proposed right now is, to me, the access routes are not really blocking anything major. It's not off the Golden Road. It's not off the Telos Road.
Right. It's 17 miles of its flank are Baxter State Park, where there's no pulp trucks coming from. Half of it is on the east or on the west side of the East Branch of the Penobscot, where there's only one bridge that can go over it within the park, within the proposed boundary, and that bridge isn't rated for the weight of a pulp truck. So just by design alone, it's really situated in a good place where we're not going to have a lot of these interactions between or sort of conflicts of uses.
Here's an argument that I couldn't quite understand when I saw it in print on the web. Erosion of the tax base. Right now it's being taxed at forestry rates, whatever it is, $1 an acre or something.
Tree growth tax.
Yeah. So not a lot of taxes coming out of there anyway.
No, that's a total misunderstanding, and it's used from time to time as an argument against a national park, but it's a complete misunderstanding, because what happens is when the Department of Interior owns land, they pay taxes to the state and to the counties, and they wouldn't have the land base in tree growth. It would be, and so the county and the state would receive what's called PILT funding, payment in lieu of taxes, and the PILT funding would increase the tax base in Penobscot County by about $350,000 from where it is now, and about $175,000 to the state. So that argument is completely false. It would, in fact, be an increase of taxes if it went into the hands of the Department of Interior.
And, of course, if the economy improves and land values go up in the towns like Patton, Ashland, et cetera, really there's an increase in taxes available.
There would be a tremendous increase. And I use PILT funding as an example, but if you wanted to carry that number out and talk about the sales tax increase and the occupancy taxes for hotels, the gas tax for people to come and visit, it would be a remarkable increase into our tax base. And so that's not a very accurate argument.
When you look at the arguments around this national park, you realize the history of arguing about the North Woods is really old. We've been arguing about it for centuries.
Right.
And some of the arguments have quieted down a little bit lately. We really aren't talking a whole lot about Plum Creek's plan over around Moosehead that much lately. Restore has actually been fairly quiet lately.
Yeah, they have taken a quiet position.
Yep. LURC is now LUPSI, or
right.
Planning Commission. We went through the whole clear cutting thing in the 90s, and there's really not been a major discussion on that. Things have actually gotten kind of quiet in the woods. It's good that you came along to stir things up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think also we're able to set the record straight in a lot of ways and answer some of these questions that have just been able to exist out there in the ether and never be addressed. And so our focus now is addressing these questions and concerns that have come up over the years that really have no basis in truth. And so to be able to actually counter those arguments that have been left uncountered for many years has been able to bring a lot of people into support of this project. And so the opposition is really a small group of people that have been saying the same things for the last 15 years, maybe more, and they're using arguments about tax base and air quality and the federal government taking over land, and all of those things just are not true. And as more and more people realize they're not true, they're wondering why we're arguing about this. And the people that own small businesses that have seen this downturn in the economy as Great Northern has sort of withered up and are looking to say, what else? We can't afford to sit around and say no to everything. We're at this point where no doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And I often use that when I talk to people that are opposed to a national park, say, okay, well, what are your ideas? What should we do with our land to make this benefit the communities that live around it?
And we still need to redouble our efforts and make sure that we're using the fiber that's available up there, our natural resources, to build our original economy. And it may not be as much paper. It could be torrefied wood. It could be composite wood products, as they're researching at the University of Maine. It could be ethanol-based fuel or whatever it is you would make out of some of these. There's technology in the future where we're probably still going to want the wood.
When the timber industry and the conservation community butt heads with each other and continue to fight about what's wrong and right, it slows the progress down. And if the conservation community and the timber industry community, the Maine forest products industry, could spend more time talking about what our goals are, I think we'd find that they're very close. And how can we help each other? And we've received endorsements from some of the larger landowners in Maine, and it's because of that. We recognize that there's value in all types of different enterprises in the North Woods, and they all revolve around our natural resources.
Yeah, and the fact is, again, it comes back to diversified economy. We got to do more than one thing up in the woods.
Right, exactly.
Well, Lucas, once again, thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we have to do this again because this is an evolving conversation. You know, I don't even know where I stand on all the issues involving the national park, so this is an educational process for me, too.
Well, great. Let's do it in the Katahdin region next time.
Can we do it at Lungsus?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
And that's it for this week. Lucas St. Clair of Elliottsville Plantation, Inc. has been my guest. And the subject has been the proposed Maine Woods National Park. This show and all previous shows are on the web at 929theticket.com. And something this controversial may be something you'd want to forward to somebody just to liven up discussions at the dinner table. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Old Town Trading Post, Dysarts, Heaven Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Van Raymond Outfitters, O'Neill's Power Equipment, and EBS. Join me next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.